From the Oregon State University Extension Service, this is Pollination, a podcast that tells the stories of researchers, land managers, and concerned citizens making bold strides to improve the health of pollinators. I'm your host, Dr. Adoni Melathopoulos, Assistant Professor in Pollinator Health in the Department of Horticulture. When you think about beekeeping supply businesses, you often think about companies that have been really in operation since the Civil War. Things like Dedant, the Kelly Company. These companies have been around for a very long time, but we've seen this resurgence in beekeeping over the last few years, and this has opened the space for some brand new companies to emerge. I wanted to do an episode that sort of focuses on this phenomenon, and I could think of no one better to talk to than Mandy Shaw up in Portland. Now, many of you probably know Mandy. She has a very slick and wonderful podcast called Beekeeper Confidential, but she also runs a company called Waggleworks, which produces these wonderful, delightful, handmade beekeeper veils, but also provides mentorship to new beekeepers in the Portland area, face-to-face, having somebody come by and sort of walk you through the steps. I wanted to talk to Mandy about starting up these new businesses, what she expects is going to happen now with COVID-19, but I also wanted to talk to her about swarming. She is a terrific swarm catcher, and she's had a kind of crazy year this year with swarms at her place, coming to her place. So we're going to get a catch up on that. It's a great episode. Mandy's just a great person to interview and talk to. I'm really excited to bring the show to you. Okay, so hi Mandy, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm great. It's good to see you.
Good to see you as well. I first met you at the Portland Urban Beekeepers, and I didn't realize at the time that you were fairly new to beekeeping. I didn't know this because you were kind of running the show. How did you get in?
How that all happened. When I first became interested in bees, I started stalking Portland Urban Beekeepers on their Facebook page. I was one of the people that joined and then just quietly observed conversations between beekeepers. But when I finally got my first hives, I went to their bee school and I joined their club. And then I heard that they were looking for a treasurer for their board of directors. And I have a background in finance. And so I thought, well, this is great. I can use this skill that I have to join up with this new skill that I'm trying to cultivate. And Portland Urban Beekeepers has been such a huge facet of my beekeeping foundation, because it not only gave me a place to go to learn about bees, but it also gave me access to the community of members that are part of the club, but also access to, the OSU Bee Lab, the speakers that we have to come and speak at the club. And it just has really accelerated my learning and what I ever would have made from working with bees.
You know, I was listening to one of your podcasts, and we'll talk about your podcast a little bit later on, but I was listening to one of your podcasts. You were sort of mentioning that in terms of people stepping up to the executive of their bee club and how that does allow you to accelerate your kind of initiation into beekeeping.
Absolutely. I think that it because you sort of take on this professional role, even though it's a volunteer position, you have extra ownership in what you're doing with your local bee community, and people approach you a little bit differently. They look at you differently. And so I think you just, for me, I felt like I really had to take my personal beekeeping to a different level if I had, rather than if I had just been like a beekeeping in my backyard and not interacting with other beekeepers. Does that make sense? It
absolutely does. And I actually was, for full admission, I was the president of this, what was called the BC Beekeepers Association. No, what was it called again? And it was it's funny. It was like it was like in the lull between the big high point of the 70s and when things got going. It's sort of like it was kind of dying. And I remember I learned a lot by being on the executive and just having to organize things. But I also remember it was a difficult time as well, because trying to find, it was a time when you couldn't find new people. And, you come in and you're in your 20s, you're just mobbed. It's like, oh, the future.
Yeah.
But you came in at a different time. This is you entered into beekeeping at a time of an upswing. There was a lot of interest in beekeeping, and you got involved with starting your own business. And I think about this because it seems like throughout the history of beekeeping, suppliers and small businesses have been, key to sort of like propagating beekeeping.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess I want to just ask you, why do you think things got going? How do you explain this sort of rise in beekeeping that's taken place recently, and what you got, the wave you got, sort of came in on?
I really think that because information now is so easily accessible, because we've got YouTube, we have podcasts, we have Facebook, obviously, I think has been a big driver of people sharing articles about the bees dying. And I think that people just want to help. But what I noticed right away, and I am guilty of this as well, I got into beekeeping thinking that I was going to be really saving the bees
Mm-hmm.
without an understanding of how complex the whole issue is. And it's not just honeybees, and it's not just a matter of setting up a hive in your backyard. And so for the people that are getting into it without having an understanding of all of that, they're suddenly slapped with, here's varroas, here's EFB. You have to keep your bees from swarming if you live in a neighborhood. There's just like all these issues that come along with managing backyard colonies that beekeepers aren't quite prepared for when they first get into it, unless they've done a lot of pre-research. But bees and equipment are so accessible that you could sort of get all of that without having to look into it too much beforehand.
Yeah. Well, and it strikes me that those kind of complications have given rise to these new services and new businesses. That the kind of businesses that have emerged like yours over the last are really novel. They're not the same. It used to be the bee supply store. That was it. The bee supply store, you go in as this little store, you buy your, it makes some of its business off selling candles. It was kind of this, but it was this one place you'd go, but there weren't all these other services available.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I observed with, Pub is we had members who had even been keeping bees for a couple of years, but they still weren't comfortable doing a basic hive inspection.
Uh-huh.
And so I started going out and helping people with their hives just for free. And I felt comfortable showing and talking about this stuff. And I could see that, just having somebody there showing you, yes, you're doing this right. Yes, you can hold the frame like this, and it's you're less likely to smash a bee or something. Having somebody there to walk you through the steps is very different than going to a meeting and watching a presentation on it or watching a YouTube video on it. It's sort of like somebody there to just coach you through it, help sort of stabilize your anxieties, give you some reassurance. And that's something that I've been able to offer a lot of my clients, is just, I want them to feel comfortable enough in their own beekeeping so that they don't have to have somebody come out and show them what to do. I want them to feel comfortable enough to be able to take off on their own and continue on with their beekeeping journey.
And so that's where Waggleworks came out of. It was seeing there was a lot of people who needed a kind of a personal kind of connection to their beekeeping. We'll talk about the podcast in a minute, but I think the podcast is the same way. It's from the perspective of kind of peer connection, like, supporting people through stories. And that, tell us a little bit about Waggleworks, and tell us how you sort of like were able to meet this demand.
Well, I knew that if I was going to go into a beekeeping business, I did not want to rely on honey sales to be my anchor, source of revenue.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even in it for the honey. I get a honey harvest once in a while, but I don't sell it, and it's not really my motivation. But I also knew I couldn't just rely on helping people with their hives. I needed to come up with some other aspects that I could offer people. And I am an artist. Always been a creator. I've always been a maker. And so before I even got bees, I started making these ridiculous bee bonnets, like really outlandish bonnets with veils. And I used really high end materials and silks and stuff. They're really impractical and not like the designs have changed over the years. But what I the reason that I started doing those is because there's not a lot of really feminine beekeeper attire out there.
Oh, for sure.
And I feel like when you're getting dressed to work with your bees, it's sort of like you're dressing for this sacred ritual, this really special thing that you're going to do. You're putting on your Sunday's best to go and be with your bees. And so I wanted to feel pretty and wear something that I made for my beekeeping. And so over the years, I've modified the designs and I've gotten really excellent feedback from people on how to make them better. And now selling the beekeeper veils is my biggest source of revenue for my business.
They're really unique. They're really amazing. They're describe them a little bit. I think for bee bonnet is a good description, but what's on the top, and tell us about the fabrics and.
So I use hats that offer UPF sun protection. So that's really important because, as beekeepers, we do spend a good amount of time outside in the summertime. But also, the screen is far enough away from your face. So if you look back, if you wear a fencing veil or something, that veil hits you in the face. And then,
sure does.
That's a vulnerability point if you're working with spicy bees. But it's also something that you can throw on over your street clothes if you have to go out to the apiary for something quick, or you can wear it with a bee suit. But what I've heard from women that buy them is they love it and they feel comfortable in them. And they just like how feminine and pretty it makes them feel.
Tell us about the fabrics as well. You've got a couple fabrics that you use for the part that would traditionally be the covering.
I really like linen because it's a natural material and it's breathable. So that's one that I use a lot. And then I also do like different cottons. And of course, now with the whole COVID thing happening, I've been getting a lot of requests for face masks.
Yeah.
So I'm making those as well. But yeah, it's funny because I will buy a bunch of materials and think, okay, this is going to last a while, but then I'll put them up on my website and I'll make some kind of announcement on Instagram or something and I'll sell out, right away. So I'm learning how to better anticipate making my purchases for materials so that it can last a little bit longer.
Well, I can imagine that is, as well. It's hard to know what the demand is. You have an idea, and I think it's a brilliant idea. And I think all the elements of your business are about personalizing. There is a kind of way in which you pick up the beekeeping manual, and it is kind of generic, and there's no personality in it. And I think there is a real desire. I've always thought this about bee clubs, for example, that they are an educational thing, but one can't discount the sort of social, kind of connection with people that you get through a bee club. There's not many opportunities in the world anymore where you can get together with different people.
It's so true. I was never part of anything before beekeeping that gave me this type of community and this type of passion and connection and camaraderie. Even though there's some bickering, I think in general, like we all want the same thing, and that's having healthy bees.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about anticipating the demand and kind of getting that all worked out. Because I imagine that it must have been shocking to you. You buy a bolt of fabric that's going to last me a while. It's like, man, I have nothing left.
I know. So for the first couple of years, I would get maybe 2 or 3 veil orders per season. And I was always surprised when I would get one. And then it just started to steadily increase, and now I'm getting like 7 or 8 orders a week. So it's grown slowly, but it's grown at a pace that I can handle. And now I don't have a heart attack when I get an order. I just get a smile.
Well, and you mentioned earlier it's not just the veil sales, but you're also helping people, kind of coaching them and looking after their bees. Tell us a little bit about that part of the business.
Yeah, I offer a couple of different services. One of them I call hands-on hive help, and that's for beekeepers who are proficient in doing the basics, but maybe there's something they need to troubleshoot, or they just need a refresher on how to do hive inspections, or just to confirm what they're seeing is really what they think they're seeing,
Oh,
or
great.
making splits, things like that. They might have me out like once or twice a year. And a lot of people will have me out to do the mite sampling for them.
Mm-hmm.
Because mite sampling, let's be honest, it makes people squeamish. They don't want to kill 300 bees to do an alcohol wash. They don't want to shake up the bees in a jar of powdered sugar. That's cruel. So
Give Mandy a call.
Mandy will do it. Mandy will do it. So that has been one thing, especially in the fall, that I do a lot of. But I also offer a year-long mentorship program for somebody who's like, really, they've never worked with bees before, but they want to do it. So I will source the hive, I'll source the bees, I'll get it set up for them, and then we meet every month to work on their hive.
Okay. Do you have people who just don't want to get into beekeeping, but they'd like to have bees in their backyard?
There are, but none of them are my clients yet.
Okay. All right.
There was somebody that called me a week ago, and I had spoken with them back in September or October, and I gave them pricing information, and they were kind of like, ugh. But then they called last week, and I'm sure it's because, now they're home all the time because of the pandemic, and they just are wanting to enjoy being outside in their yard. Let's get some bees. So they called me and they were like, we want to do it. We want to get bees now. Well, it's a little bit late to get going on something like that. And because of the pandemic, my kids are home all the time now. And I've had to halt all of my in-person hive visits until this thing clears up.
Right,
because
because
schools are closed. And
you have to look after your kids. This is the problem that a lot of people are having these days is kids at home and just trying to work around your beekeeping with having to keep up with your parenting duties.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, like, I'm a homeschool teacher now because they have online learning that they need to do, and I have to help them with that. And so that takes a couple hours out of our day. And it's interesting because I've had a couple of people say, well, why don't you just bring your kids with you? I am a special needs parent. I have a son that's on the spectrum, and it just doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
It does not work to bring him along with me to do these visits. And I'm okay with that. And I feel like because I have done enough planning and have done enough, I've created a business that is not just one offering. Mm-hmm. There are other parts of my business that I can focus on right now and still have revenue coming in while this pandemic is taking place. I still have the podcast, I have my beekeeper veils, I can do my blogging. And if somebody really wanted to, we could do a video consult. I mean, the resources are there to do that, but it was a decision that I feel okay about it, but it was hard to tell my clients, I'm sorry, and I gave them some referrals so they could connect with some other really awesome beekeepers that are doing similar work that I'm doing. But yeah, it was kind of a bittersweet moment, like, whoa.
I think about this, in the history of beekeeping, there are these periods that come that are very hard on businesses. I do remember, I'm old enough to remember the 80s where honey prices, everybody was dependent on honey prices, and the prices just tanked. The U.S. government had held surpluses, and then they stopped the program. They dumped it on the market. And there were people who had kind of diversified businesses who were able to ride it out. But there were people that were highly leveraged, had taken out large loans on their business and were in real trouble when something kind of happens. And it sounds like you've got you really, maybe unintentionally, by just focusing on bringing personality into beekeeping, you've been able to sort of like have a number of dimensions.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny because before all of this happened, I was actually looking at having my veils manufactured on a larger scale, still locally here in Portland, but done at a sewing house. And I would have had to take a loan out to pay for all the materials up front and because of the volume. And I ended up deciding not to do that.
Wow.
And I'm very glad that I trusted my gut and said, yeah, I don't think we're quite there yet.
Wow. Well, thanks for talking about it. I think there's a lot of people probably listening to the show who are in some kind of similar situation, either around parenting or around a business that suddenly the demand has shifted. And it's really good to just hear how people are dealing with this.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a quick break. I want to come back and I want to focus on your podcast, which I think is exemplary. It's great. Beekeeper Confidential. So let's take a quick break. We'll come back and we'll dive into some episodes with you. Fantastic. That was great.
I love that you do little breaks in your show.
Yeah, I don't know why I do.
It's fun though. I was reading somebody had posted on Facebook how people are trying to cram so much information into conferences and now into these Zoom meetings. And it's so much information that people sort of leave stunned because they don't have enough time to process everything. And by offering your listeners a little break during the show, it's like just a deep breath. Let's process what we just heard before we dive into the next thing.
Well, speaking of next thing, I guess I follow you on social media, and every time I log on and I look up, you've got another swarm. Tell us about that. Seems to be a good year for swarms, or?
It's just wild. Yes, this year is a really good year for swarms. I have always been kind of lucky in swarm catching. My very first experience with a honeybee swarm was before I even became a beekeeper. A swarm came and landed in my front yard.
Oh, wow.
And I was already interested in bees, but I wasn't quite ready yet. But that was the thing that, made me realize I got to do this thing. But we called a beekeeper from Portland Urban Beekeepers, Elliot Gerlash. He actually recently passed away, but he was the first beekeeper that I ever met.
Oh, wow.
He came and got the bees. But that was such an exciting day in my life. And the following season, when I got my bees, I put up a bait hive in the tree that those bees had swarmed to, and I caught 2 swarms back to back.
What? And then crazy.
Every year I put up a bait hive in this tree, and I don't know what it is about this spot, but swarms come every year. But this year, something completely wild happened, and it was just this last week, the first really nice stretch of weather that we had here in April. I had scout bees at all of my empty hives, and I knew because of the activity, something's going to happen. I'm going to get a swarm this week. And my neighbor, who is really, I'm very blessed to have a neighbor that likes my bees, and he doesn't mind the swarms, and he doesn't mind the bee flights going over his backyard. He is always on lookout for when the swarms come. And so if he sees one and I'm not there, he'll text me or call me or walk through the swarm to knock on my door to say the bees are here. Well, I'd been inside, and then I get a text message from him, bees! So I run outside, and there's a swarm coming into my backyard, not to my bait hive. This swarm chose a Warre hive that was sitting on the ground for storage.
That something?
It's in a horrible location, but they moved in, and as they were settling down, I look up and I see a second swarm coming in. And I'm jumping up and down. Yay, there's another swarm coming in. This swarm was moving into the bee tree that I have. I have an empty bee tree, and it's maybe 6 feet away from where the Warre hive sits. Because the two happened one right after another, I mean, really within 10 minutes of each other, half of the second swarm went to the Warre hive because they were
I've never
fanning,
heard of that.
and the other half went into the bee tree. And I'm like, oh my God, what do I do? There was so much confusion. And then I got a call that there was a swarm in Tigard. So I had to leave to go get that swarm. But when I came back, I could see in under the Warre hive, there is a thick slab of bees, and it's the bees from the second swarm had gone under the bottom board of the Warre hive and were just kind of stuck there because they couldn't go in. There was so much fighting. There were dead bees like all over the ground. So I had to move the Warre hive, and I took the bottom board and I set it right in front of the entrance to the bee tree, and they knew they were home. They responded so quickly with fanning and running in. And that's so amazing to me that they knew right away they were home. They were at the place that they had meant to go in the first place, but they missed the mark that first time because the swarms just happened too close to one another.
Wow,
It's crazy.
That's a crazy. I can imagine that says something about the cues, that when there's like, when you're in the air, things get a little crazy, and it's like, oh, these guys are in the air too. You just kind of follow them, and that is a very interesting observation. I have to say that is remarkable.
It was wild. Now let's add another layer of interest to this bee tree. Some bumblebees had moved into it.
What is it with your place? Like, Portland's a big place, folks. Like, Mandy's is not the only place to go. They don't know that. Okay. Anyways, there was a bumblebee nest.
There's a bumblebee nest in the bee tree, and so there was this battle going on with this bumblebee nest and the swarm arriving, and it was just, there are still bumblebees trying to go back in, but the honeybees aren't letting them, and
that's a second thing that I've never heard of, but I can imagine happens all the time where you have a hole and there's a
but that was like certainly the most unusual swarm experience I've ever had. Ever.
Wow. Well, there's so much about what you've just said in the last few minutes that is remarkable. There's that story, the fact that swarms seem to come to your house. Tell us a trick about baiting swarms. What do you do?
I've tried lots of different methods, and the bees always do something different than I expect. I will try bait hives that have fully drawn combs in them. I've tried bait hives with no combs. I've tried bait hives with one piece of brood comb, or even taking brood comb and smashing it up and rubbing it on the insides of the walls and then sprinkling it around on the floor, because they're looking for the scent, really.
Yeah.
Lemongrass oil, I think, works just as well as Swarm Commander. I've tried them both.
Swarm Commander?
Yeah, Swarm Commander has a synthetic Nasanov pheromone ingredient.
Yeah.
And it's weird because when I first spray it on a bait hive, it does get bees' attention, but they kind of seem like they're getting jumped out on it. And then I think it wears off really fast, and then they go. But I think that lemongrass oil, like, save your money. Lemongrass oil works just as well.
Yeah.
But I've tried all different cavity sizes, and I haven't really found that they always go after one thing over another. I think it all really depends on the needs, what they're looking for, and how desperate they are.
Yeah, I imagine so. I think back to all those studies that Tom Seeley did on that little island, giving them 16 permutations. Like, you've got two choices on this island. You're going there or there. Like, it's like going to the optometrist. Is this better or is that better? It looks the same to me.
Right, exactly. So I don't know. And this was the first time that I've had swarms move into empty hives and not my bait hive. So that was weird. And then I had a stack of nucleus colonies just on the side of my house, and I had a swarm move into those. So
wow.
And it wasn't very far from where the bait hive in the tree was. So the bait hive in the tree has, it's 12 to 13 feet off the ground. It has a small 1-inch hole entrance. It's a good small size. Usually that works, but this year they've just chosen other spots.
That's remarkable. Fortunately I was just making nukes the other day, and I noticed no swarm cells yet, but I knew it was going to come. If I didn't deal with them now, they were getting pretty jammed in there. And it was amazing because just 2 weeks ago I thought I had to feed them. I
lost a colony just like 3 weeks ago to starvation, and when it's at a location away from home. I have some bees in Westland at a farm, and this was my star colony. I was devastated when I got the news that it had died. And when I opened it up, they had no food. It was just, you could see it had been wall-to-wall brood. A really wonderful queen, but it just shows how close they were just living on the edge. And we had those cold days where it froze and it rained and they couldn't get out and they starved.
But not now. That is
not
for sure.
Now. My other hives are building tons of wax and putting away nectar, and it's like, oh, if they could only have just held on a little bit longer, or if the bad beekeeper sitting in the interview chair had just gone and fed them. I think that's one of the things that's so exciting about beekeeping is just you're constantly being challenged. And if you don't learn from these mistakes, you'll never get good at it.
That is for sure. I often think about that with beginners, is trying to simplify as much as possible, not to make it simple, but so that they can isolate their mistakes, because otherwise you don't know what went wrong, and then you just keep repeating things.
Yeah. And I'm lucky. I have a lot of bees to work with, and I've gotten to play with a lot of other people's bees. So I think for a 5-year beekeeper, I've gotten to experience a lot more than a typical backyard beekeeper in that amount of time.
Well, you've also been in a lot of beehives. Transitioning on, we're going to talk about Beekeeper Confidential, and that has taken you into a lot of apiaries. Tell us why you started the show in the first place. What were you trying to?
What was I thinking?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it was the first year that I was in business as Waggleworks, and early on, after I quit this silly day job that I had and started this company, I was on the Ologies podcast with Allie Ward. And I didn't realize it at the time, but her podcast is really popular, and she has this enormous following of people that just adore her. And when I was on that podcast, I realized this is pretty fun. It took me back to when I was a kid, and my sister and I had this little keyboard and a tape recorder, and it had a microphone, and we would make our own radio shows. They were call-in radio shows, and we had all these characters and like totally silly stuff. That's but it brought me back to that. Like, this is really fun. But also, it showed me that it's easy to reach a global audience because of the technology that we have available. And so that happened, and I started thinking about what it would be like to have my own podcast. But I held on to the idea for months before really going through with it, because I realized not only are you putting yourself out there, but it's a big commitment, and it's something that I wanted to do well. And I think you were probably one of the first professional colleagues that I mentioned, wanting to make this podcast for, and you were totally supportive of it. They really worried about stepping on other people's toes.
Oh yeah.
So your support was really awesome. And then I started playing with names of what it could be. It was going to either be, this is a total secret, you guys. You can't tell anyone this.
Just us.
It's confidential. It was either going to be Beekeeper Confidential or Perspectives in Beekeeping.
Oh.
Like, which is more fun? Beekeeper Confidential. So that's what I went with.
I love it because it really does describe the show. It is, you're really kind of getting the confidence of the person you're interviewing, and you really, all the episodes are, it's about beekeeping, and there's all sorts of beekeeping skills you're learning, but you're also learning about the person and how they got into it. It really helps. I always think this with somebody who's getting into beekeeping for the first time. It's daunting, and it's nice to hear, oh, I made those mistakes. I've done it. I did this for this reason. My motivations changed over time. Like, all of those things are really reassuring to hear.
And I also feel like, because people are learning along with me, I learned so much from my guests, and I really wanted to make sure that I wasn't making Beekeeper Confidential how to beekeep like Mandy. That I never wanted that to be the core of it. It's the message is, we're on this journey together. Let's learn together in a way that's fun and friendly, and something that I hope people look forward to hearing every 2 weeks.
Well, you've had some great memorable guests. Tell us a little bit about it. It's hard to sort of pick guests. I was like, let's go through this show. It's like, who's memorable? It's like, sheesh.
Oh.
But who are some of the, just off the top of your head, just pull us through some episodes, because you've had some really great ones, and some of the people you have on the show are not, some of them are mentors of yours locally, but you've also reached out to some peculiar characters.
Yeah. Well, probably one of my favorite episodes is with Dr. Samuel Ramsey. And I super loved that episode because of how fun he was to interview. But he also sings. If you're not familiar with him, he has an amazing voice. And I wanted him to sing on my show. And so I came up with this really ridiculous song about varroa mites. And I'm like, I'm just gonna put myself out there, and I'm gonna sing it, and I'm gonna see if he'll sing it with me. And he did. And it was such a delightful moment. Like, we had been talking about kind of heavy stuff, but then we sing this song and we're laughing, and it was just really, really special. It was a really special moment. There was that, and then Peter Nelson, the director of the Pollinators film, I reached out to him.
What was that like? I watched the film, but I didn't hear the episode. Tell us a little bit about that.
He was so nice and like generous with his time. He's interviewing me while he's on the road, because he's showing in all these different places, but he took the time to chat with me about making the film, and he was such a down-to-earth guy. It was just really easy to talk with him, and I loved it. It was one of those episodes that I went back and listened to 2 or 3 times after publishing it.
How did he get interested in this topic? Does he have a bee background, or what? How did he get drawn to it?
He is a beekeeper. He's been keeping bees for quite a while, actually, just as a backyard beekeeper. But he has an interest in farming and agriculture, and wanted to do this piece about what's happening with the agricultural industry and how bees are affected by it. And one of the things that was a big takeaway for me was I have a very different perspective on commercial beekeeping now than I did prior to watching the film. Mm-hmm. What he taught me was that they're simply responding to all of these different pressures that are placed on them, that are placed on their bees. They don't want to be having to treat their colonies so frequently. They don't want to put their colonies in orchards that maybe the neighboring orchard is using some kind of fungicide or pesticide on them. But that's just the reality of what it is now.
You've also had some episodes with not commercial beekeepers, but new beekeepers, people who are younger coming in. And I've been amazed at some of those episodes at just the skill level, their capacity. We had an episode recently with somebody who's a queen breeder from Santa Cruz.
Yeah,
tell us a little bit about
Emily Bondor.
She was amazing.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed visiting with her. One of the cool things that's happening now, because I've been doing the show for like a year and a half, previous guests are connecting me with people that they think I should, have on the show. And so I feel like we're weaving this wonderful tapestry of connectivity. We all love bees so much, but we're always doing things a little bit different from each other. And there's just so much to learn. And I don't want the show just to be from people that are, experts in the field. I want a wide range of guests because it makes it more relatable, I think.
Well, I often hear from people, and it's always great to hear from people. But I also sometimes wonder how the podcast is helping people kind of do pollinator health, or how it inspires them. How do you think, have you had any feedback, or do you have some sense of what your audience, how the podcast is sort of serving in their beekeeping journey?
One of the things that I think is really cool is when somebody's been on the show, they get a bunch of emails from people, or people contacting them on social media, like, hey, I heard you on Beekeeper Confidential. I found you now. And so the show is sort of taken on this, I'm able to use it as a platform to highlight and uplift what somebody else is doing. And that feels really good, to be able to use it as a way to highlight somebody else's work. But I think that my listeners are mostly hobbyists. I do have people that don't even have bees yet that listen to the show. And sometimes they'll write me and be like, can you please do a really basic show so like we know what you guys are talking about? And I will do one at some point. But yeah, I'll have people just say, I love what you're doing. Thank you. And hearing feedback like that is really nice. There's only been a couple of trolls along the way, so I feel
I realized
we're doing pretty good.
You and I have both had somebody who's had the same complaint. So
man,
the person's probably listening right now. They're right, and said, "Damn right, that is true." Is that the laughing? They just don't like us laughing.
Let's do it.
All right, there you go. Don't like laughing.
Yeah.
Monsters. Anyways. We have a segment that we do on all the shows. I'm really curious of your answers. Let's take a quick break and we'll come back and get your book recommendations and tool and pollinator. Okay, well, let's roll.
Okay.
Okay, we're back. So 3 questions. As a podcaster, I'm really curious because you've really seen the world. So when I ask you, what is your book recommendation? I'm so curious what you'll say.
Well, I have a bookshelf that's loaded with amazing books, and I've met some of the authors. But when I thought about what is my favorite book recommendation, I almost chose The Bees in Your Backyard, because that book has been an amazing resource for me, especially early on when I was curious about all of the bees that I was seeing in my pollinator garden. But I also love a really wonderful story. And so I have to go with The Honey Bus by Meredith May.
That's a brand new one to me. Describe the book. What is it about?
So wonderful. Well, it is based on true events. It's her memoir. And she talks about growing up in Big Sur, California, where her grandfather was a beekeeper. And she grows up around him working with these bees while also dealing with trauma from her relationship with her mom that
Uh-huh.
was very broken, and how spending that time with her grandfather and the bees brought her healing.
Oh, really?
And her grandfather harvested honey out of an old school bus, or no, it was an army bus, I think it was, that he
Really?
converted into like a little honey extractor shed. And
Huh.
that's the honey bus. But she does such a wonderful job at describing every detail. And I feel like beekeepers can really appreciate her book the most because we know the smells, we know the sounds, we know the feelings that come along with spending time with our bees, whether we're just sitting next to a hive or doing an inspection or catching a swarm. She touches on all of those things. And it's just a really, really lovely story.
So one more time, it's called.
It's The Honey Bus, and it's by Meredith May.
Okay, great. I was thinking, there was a thing. There's a famous conceptual artist from Germany, post-war Germany. What's his name? He did all the bee stuff, and he had a bus that he filled with bees. It was some kind of like democracy thing. Like,
Oh my gosh.
what's the guy's name? Anyway, one day I'll remember. But um, that this sounds like a great story, and I always love it when you have an author who really can recreate what we experience, but you see it on the page, you read it, and it's just like, oh, that's the word for it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, our next question is: do you have a go-to tool?
I Well, when it comes to doing hive work, I'm a J hook.
A J hook?
A J hook. Yeah, for
The
the
little
hive
accent
tool.
ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's my favorite like beekeeping tool, but I also love my swarm catching bucket.
Oh,
And
describe it.
so it's a 5 gallon bucket, and it has you know, they make bucket lids that are also seats, so they're a little bit thicker, and you could buy them on Amazon.
Ah, okay.
And I use that for the lid, but I use it to catch swarms, and it has a little hole drilled in it for their entrance, and then it has a larger hole where I put a screen so they have ventilation. And when I go out swarm catching, I don't always know what hive I want to put these bees in or what apiary I want to put them in. So having the bee bucket gives me options. It gives me something to safely collect them in that's lightweight, and it's just the right size for them. Sometimes they have to spend the night in it, depending on the time of day that I caught this swarm. But when I find the hive that I'm going to put them in, it's very easy just to
Oh,
pour them
there it
into it
is.
from my bucket.
No, I'm seeing it now. I have a picture of it in front of me. Oh, there it is. Oh. And they just crawl in through that little hole and away you go.
Yeah. Yeah. And because it's had so many swarms in it over the years, it smells like a really wonderful, bee swarm. And so it's not hard to convince the bees to go into it. It
And
doesn't take much.
it's also an OSU Beaver Orange, which I also appreciate. Thank you. Okay, last question I have is: do you have a favorite pollinator?
Well, I do. And it's the worker honeybee.
Okay.
I really identify with the worker bee because she's kind of a jack of all trades. She's a builder, she's a forager, she's a protector, she's a caregiver, she's resourceful. And those are all qualities that I want to embody in myself.
I think it's a really good point. It's they do a lot of things. They throughout a bee's life, they will not be doing the same thing twice, and
You have to be versatile to get by in this world.
they are engaged in quite a big venture if you think about it. Like
Yeah.
they don't think small. Neither do you.
They don't, and they all have to work together.
That's true.
It's never about just the one bee. She's she's not thinking for herself. She's thinking for her colony, for her family, what's going to be best for them. That's the mother in me talking.
Well, that is fantastic. And it's been a real delight catching up with you. It's been long overdue. And I wish you all the best, especially in these difficult times.
Thank you.
You certainly are blazing the trail here in terms of bee entrepreneurship here in the Pacific Northwest. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. The show is produced by Quinn Sin and Neal, who's a student here at OSU in the New Media Communications program, and the show wouldn't even be possible without the support of the Oregon Legislature, the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, and Western SARE. Show notes with links mentioned on each episode are available on the website, which is at pollinationpodcast.oregonstate.edu. I also love hearing from you, and there's several ways to connect with me. The first one is you can visit the website and leave an episode-specific comment. You can suggest a future guest or topic, or ask a question that could be featured in a future episode. But you can do the same things on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook by visiting the Oregon Bee Project. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next week.